There are some objects in this world that should never be touched, never be moved, never be passed from one hand to another. There are things that carry history like a disease, spreading their poison from generation to generation, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal their true nature. This is a story about one such object, about a family that thought they knew their own history, and about the terrible price of greed disguised as tradition. Listen carefully, for this tale will chill your bones and make you question every heirloom sitting in your own home. In the village of Ojidai, nestled in the hills where the old forest meets the farmland, there lived a family called the Okonkos. They were a respected family, not the richest but certainly not poor, known for their long lineage and their connection to the land. The patriarch of this family was Papa Emeka, a man of 72 years whose body had been bent by time but whose mind remained sharp as a new machete. Papa Emeka knew he was dying. The cough that had started as a minor irritation had grown into something that rattled his chest like stones in a gourd, and the village healer had taken him aside and told him what he already knew in his heart: his time was coming to an end. So Papa Emeka called a family meeting, summoning all his children and grandchildren to his compound on a Saturday afternoon when the sun hung heavy and hot in the sky. They came from near and far: his eldest son Chinedu, who lived in the city and wore expensive suits and had grown fat on imported food; his daughter Ndozi, who had married into another village and had 5 children always hanging from her wrapper; his younger son Obiora, who had stayed in Ojidai and worked the family land and had never quite lived up to his father's expectations. And then there were the grandchildren, 8 of them ranging from teenagers to young adults, each carrying the Okonko blood in their veins, each about to learn that bloodlines carry more than just genetic inheritance. Papa Emeka sat in his chair under the big udara tree where family decisions had been made for 3 generations, and he looked at each face gathered before him. He cleared his throat, which started another coughing fit that lasted several minutes and left blood on his handkerchief that he tried to hide but everyone saw. When he could finally speak, his voice was thin but determined. "My children, my grandchildren," he said, "I have lived a long life, longer than most men are blessed to live. I have seen the world change in ways that would make our ancestors weep or laugh, I am not sure which. But some things do not change. Some things are constant. Family is constant. Tradition is constant. And inheritance is constant." He gestured to his daughter Ndozi, who brought forward a wooden box, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the sunlight, patterns that made the eyes water if you looked at them too long. The box was old, ancient really, its wood darkened by time and handling, bound with brass that had turned green with age. Papa Emeka placed his weathered hands on the box with something that looked like reverence mixed with fear, though no one noticed the fear part, too focused on what treasure might be inside. "This box," Papa Emeka said slowly, "has been passed down through our family for 10 generations. 10 generations. It came to us from my grandfather's grandfather's grandfather, all the way back to the time when the first Okonko settled in these hills, when the forest was deeper and the spirits walked more openly among men." The family leaned forward, curious and eager. Papa Emeka opened the box with a key that hung around his neck, and inside, nested in red velvet that had faded to a dusty pink, was a mask. But to call it simply a mask would be like calling the ocean simply water. It was a face carved from ebony wood so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with features that were both beautiful and terrible, human and not human, familiar and utterly alien. The eyes were inlaid with something that might have been ivory or bone, and they seemed to follow you no matter which angle you viewed them from. The mouth was slightly open, carved with such skill that you could see individual teeth, and the expression was one that could not be quite defined. Was it smiling or grimacing? Welcoming or warning? Peaceful or predatory? "This," Papa Emeka said, his voice now barely above a whisper, "is the Okonko family heirloom. It has been kept safe, kept secret, for all these generations. It is the source of our family's fortune, the reason we have never suffered complete poverty, the reason misfortune never quite destroys us. The mask protects the family. The mask provides for the family. The mask is the family's guardian spirit made manifest. He paused, his eyes moving across each face. But there are rules. Rules that must never be broken. The mask must never be worn by anyone outside the direct bloodline. The mask must never be sold or given away. The mask must always be kept in this box when not in use. And most importantly, his voice became harder, more urgent. The mask must never be worn on the night of the new moon. Never. Do you all understand? The family nodded, though their eyes were fixed on the mask with varying expressions of fascination, greed, and something close to hunger. Chinedu, the eldest son, spoke up, his city accent making his words sound strange in the village setting. Papa, you speak of fortune and protection, but our family is not wealthy. We are comfortable, yes, but not rich. What fortune has this mask brought exactly? There was skepticism in his voice, and something else, something that suggested he was already calculating the value of such an antique artifact in the city's booming art market. Papa Emeka looked at his eldest son with an expression of disappointment that had been worn into his features through years of similar conversations. The fortune, my son, is that we survive. That when drought comes, our wells do not run dry. That when sickness sweeps through villages, we are touched but not destroyed. That when war came to these lands, our compound was passed by. That when poverty crushes families all around us, we always have enough. Do not mistake survival for granted. It is the greatest wealth, and it comes at a price. He coughed again, longer this time, and when he recovered, he continued. I am giving this mask to Obiora, my youngest son. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Chinedu straightened in his chair, his face darkening with anger. The youngest? Papa, I am your firstborn. The inheritance should come to me. This is tradition. Ngozi remained quiet, but her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. She had hoped, perhaps, that as the only daughter she might receive something special, might be valued despite her gender. But it was Obiora who looked most shocked, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide. He was a simple man, content with farming and village life, and the weight of this responsibility seemed to settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. It is my choice, Papa Emeka said firmly, and I have made it. Chinedu, you have your city life, your business, your ambitions. You would sell this mask the moment you thought the price was right, do not deny it. Ngozi, you have married into another family, another lineage. Your loyalties are divided by design, not fault. But Obiora has stayed. Obiora has worked the land. Obiora understands what it means to be patient, to be constant, to be connected to something larger than himself. The mask goes to him. He turned to his younger son, whose face still showed shock and something that might have been fear. But know this, my son. This gift is also a burden. The mask will provide, yes, but it will also demand. And you must never, never break the rules I have given you. The meeting ended with tension thick in the air like smoke from a cooking fire. Chinedu left almost immediately, his expensive car kicking up dust as it roared away from the compound, his farewell brief and cold. Ngozi stayed longer, helping to prepare food for the evening meal, but her movements were mechanical, her mind clearly elsewhere. The grandchildren whispered among themselves, their young imaginations already spinning tales about the mysterious mask and what power it might hold. And Obiora sat alone under the udara tree long after everyone else had gone inside, staring at the wooden box that now sat in his lap, feeling its weight, feeling the responsibility of 10 generations pressing down on him, and wondering if he was strong enough to carry it. Papa Emeka died 3 weeks later, passing quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning when the roosters were just beginning their dawn chorus. The funeral was large, as befitted a man of his standing, with people coming from neighboring villages to pay respects, to share stories, to honor a life well lived. But underneath the mourning and the ritual, there were undercurrents of tension, whispers about the inheritance, about the mysterious mask that had been given to the younger son, about fairness and tradition and the old man's final wishes. Obiora kept the mask in its box in his own home, in a special room he cleared out for it, following his father's instructions to keep it safe and secret. But he found himself drawn to it, found himself opening the box late at night just to look at the carved face, to study its features, to try to understand what his father had meant about it being a guardian and a burden. The mask was undeniably beautiful in its terrible way, a masterpiece of carving that must have taken months or years to create. But more than its beauty, there was something else about it, something that made the air feel different when the box was open, made the shadows in the room seem deeper, made the silence seem to have weight. His wife, Ediku, did not like the mask. She told him so directly, in the way wives do when they sense something is wrong but cannot quite articulate why. "That thing makes me uncomfortable," she said one evening as Obiora was closing the box after one of his late-night examinations. "It feels wrong. Like it is watching us even when the box is closed. Maybe your father was senile at the end. Maybe we should get rid of it." Obiora looked at her sharply, remembering his father's warning about never selling or giving away the mask. "We cannot," he said firmly. "It is family inheritance. It would be disrespectful to Papa's memory." But privately, he was beginning to understand her unease. There was something about the mask, something he could not name, that felt away in a way objects should not feel. The first strange occurrence happened a month after the funeral. Obiora woke in the middle of the night to find himself standing in the room with the mask, with no memory of how he had gotten there. The box was open, and he was holding the mask in his hands, his fingers tracing the carved features as if in a trance. Ediku found him there, frozen and unresponsive, and had to shake him violently to wake him from whatever state he was in. When he came back to himself, he had no memory of sleepwalking, no explanation for why he would take the mask from its box while unconscious. "You were whispering," Ediku told him, her voice frightened. "Speaking in a language I do not know. Your voice did not sound like your own." Obiora felt cold fear settle in his stomach, but he pushed it away, told himself it was stress, grief over his father's death, the weight of new responsibility manifesting in odd ways. But it happened again. And again. 3 more times in the following weeks, Obiora would wake to find himself in the mask's room, holding it, sometimes speaking in languages he did not know, sometimes simply standing there staring at the carved face for hours. Ediku began to lock their bedroom door at night, but somehow Obiora would still escape, would still end up with the mask. The children, his 3 young daughters, began to have nightmares, waking screaming about a face watching them through their window, a face carved from wood with eyes that glowed in the darkness. The family's peace was crumbling, and at the center of it all was the mask, sitting in its box, innocent and terrible. Meanwhile, Chinedu, the eldest son, had not forgotten about the inheritance. His anger had not cooled but had instead fermented into something more calculating, more dangerous. He made visits to Obiora's home, ostensibly to check on his younger brother, to see how he was managing, to fulfill the duty of family connection. But his eyes would always drift to the room where the mask was kept, and his questions would always circle back to the heirloom, to its value, to its history. "Have you had it appraised?" he would ask casually. "An artifact that old must be worth a fortune. You could sell it to a museum, use the money to improve your life, give your daughters better opportunities." Obiora would refuse each time, patiently at first, then with growing irritation as Chinedu's visits became more frequent and his suggestions more insistent. It was during one of these visits that Chinedu saw his opportunity. Obiora had been called away urgently to deal with a problem in his fields, some dispute with a neighbor about boundary markers, something that required his immediate attention. Ediku was at the market with the children. The house was empty except for Chinedu, and he knew exactly where the mask was kept. He told himself it was not stealing. He was the eldest son. The mask should have been his by right. Papa Emeka had been wrong to give it to Obiora, had been senile and unfair in his final days. Chinedu was simply correcting an injustice, claiming what should have always been his. These were the lies he told himself as he walked into that room, as he opened the box with hands that trembled slightly, as he lifted the mask and felt its unexpected warmth, as if it had been sitting in sunlight though the room was cool. He held it up to examine it more closely, and in the dim light of the room, the mask seemed to smile at him, seemed to welcome him, seemed to invite him to put it on and see the world through its ancient eyes. Chinedu resisted the urge. He was not a superstitious village man like his brother. He did not believe in spirits and curses and family legends. He believed in money and opportunity and the tangible reality of valuable objects. He wrapped the mask carefully in cloth, placed it in his shoulder bag, and walked out of Obiora's compound with the stride of a man who believed he had just made the smartest decision of his life. He did not notice, as he drove away, that the sky had begun to darken though it was only mid-afternoon, or that birds had stopped singing in the trees, or that the temperature had dropped several degrees in the span of minutes. He was too busy calculating how much money he could get for his prize. Obiora discovered the theft within hours of returning home. The open box, the missing mask, the feeling of violation that comes from having something precious stolen. He knew immediately who had taken it, and rage filled him, rage mixed with terror because he remembered his father's warnings, remembered the rules, remembered that the mask must stay within the family's protection and care. He called Chinedu, but his brother did not answer. He sent messages that went unread. He even drove to the city that evening, to Chinedu's expensive apartment in a gated complex where security guards looked at his farmer's clothes with barely disguised contempt. But Chinedu was not there, or would not come to the door, and Obiora drove home feeling helpless and afraid. Chinedu, meanwhile, had taken the mask to a dealer in African art, a Lebanese man named Mr. Hossein who operated a high-end gallery in Victoria Island, where the wealthy expatriates and elite Nigerians bought art as investment pieces without caring about meaning or origin. Hassan's eyes had lit up when he saw the mask, recognizing immediately that it was authentic, ancient, incredibly valuable. "This is Igbo work," Hossein said, examining it with a jeweler's loupe, probably 18th century, maybe older. "Museum quality. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Where did you get this?" Chinedu lied smoothly about finding it in an old family storage, about having the right to sell it, about there being no complications or curses or warnings attached. Hossein, who cared only about authenticity and profit, did not ask too many questions. He offered a price that made Chinedu's head spin, 5 million naira, cash, right now, no paperwork, no questions. Chinedu should have felt triumph. Should have felt vindicated in his decision. 5 million naira for something that had just been sitting in a box in his brother's house, providing nothing but superstitious worry. He had been right. The mask's only power was its monetary value, and now that value would be his. But as he took the cash, as he walked out of Hassan's gallery with the heavy bag, Chinedu felt something strange. The air seemed thick, hard to breathe. The sunlight seemed dimmer. And he could swear he heard, very faintly, the sound of laughter, not human laughter but something else, something that made his skin prickle with primitive fear. He shook it off. Stress. Guilt, perhaps, though he tried not to acknowledge that. He went home to his apartment, locked the door, and spread the money on his bed, counting it, running his hands through it, trying to recapture the feeling of victory he should be experiencing. That night, Chinedu had his first dream. He was standing in a forest older and darker than any that existed in modern Nigeria, a forest from a time before cities, before colonization, before history. And in that forest, he saw faces carved into every tree, thousands of them, all different but all connected, all watching him with those ivory-inlaid eyes. And then one face detached itself from a tree and floated toward him, and he recognized it as the mask, but now it was not wood but flesh, breathing, alive, hungry. It spoke to him in a voice like termites eating through wood, like time consuming everything. "You have broken the covenant," it said. "You have sold what was not yours to sell. You have traded protection for profit. Now you will learn what it means to be unprotected." Chinedu woke gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart racing. Just a dream. Just guilt manifesting as nightmare. He got up, got water, tried to calm himself. But when he returned to his bedroom, he found the money on his bed was moving. Not falling off or being blown by wind, but moving with purpose, rearranging itself into a pattern, into a shape, into a face. The money had formed itself into the shape of the mask, balls placed with impossible precision to create eyes, mouth, features. Chinedu screamed and swept the money off the bed, but his hands passed through it as if through smoke, and the face remained, watching him, smiling that ambiguous smile. He ran from his apartment in his pajamas, ran to his car, drove through the night city streets with no destination, just trying to escape. But everywhere he looked, he saw faces. Faces in the patterns of streetlights. Faces in the shapes of buildings. Faces in the shadows between things. And they were all the same face, the mask's face, multiplied endlessly, watching him, judging him, waiting. By morning, Chinedu's mind was fracturing. He called his sister Ngozi in a panic, babbling about masks and faces and curses, begging her to help him. Ngozi, who had her own disappointments about the inheritance but was not consumed by greed, listened to her brother's breakdown and felt pity mixed with grim satisfaction. "You stole from family," she said quietly. "You broke Papa's trust. You ignored his warnings. Did you think there would be no consequences?" But even as she said this, Ngozi felt something cold settle in her own heart. Because she had been harboring her own resentment, her own sense of unfairness about being excluded from the inheritance simply because she was female, simply because she had married into another family. And that resentment, she would soon learn, was its own kind of poison. Meanwhile, back in Ojidai, Obiora was experiencing his own nightmare. Since the mask had been stolen, since it had been removed from the family's protection and care, things were going wrong. His crops began to fail, not through drought or pests but through some inexplicable blight that the elders had never seen before. His children fell ill with fevers that came and went without pattern or reason. His wife became distant, cold, would wake screaming from nightmares she could not remember. And Obiora himself felt something watching him constantly, something disappointed, something angry that the trust placed in him had been betrayed. He went to the village priest, the man who served the local shrine and understood the old ways. The priest listened to Obiora's story, his face growing graver with each word. "Your father should have destroyed that mask," the priest said finally. "Should have broken the cycle generations ago. But he was afraid, and that fear kept him bound to tradition, kept him feeding the thing that lives within the wood. Now it has been released from its bonds by theft and greed, and it will consume your family unless you can bring it back, unless you can fulfill the covenant." Obiora asked what covenant, what agreement his family had made. The priest shook his head. "That is not for me to tell. That is knowledge passed down through your bloodline. But I can tell you this, the mask was created as a container, a prison for something that should not walk free. Your ancestor, the first Okonkwo, made a terrible bargain. He wanted protection for his family, wanted fortune, wanted power. And he got it, but the cost was that his bloodline would be forever tied to the thing in the mask, forever responsible for keeping it contained, forever paying the price of his greed." Obiora demanded to know more, demanded the full history that had been kept from him. The priest hesitated but finally agreed, saying that the time for secrets was past, that Obiora needed to understand what he was fighting if he had any hope of surviving. They went together to the priest's shrine, to a back room where old records were kept, histories written on bark and hide, stories preserved from times before paper, before writing as most knew it. And there, by lamplight, the priest revealed the truth that the Okonkwo family had hidden for 10 generations. The first Okonkwo, whose name had been lost to time and was now only referred to as the founder, had been a man consumed by ambition. He lived in an era of warfare between villages, when drought and disease killed without mercy, when life was uncertain and survival required either extraordinary luck or extraordinary power. The founder wanted more than survival. He wanted dominance. He wanted his family to rise above others, to be untouchable, to never know hunger or defeat. So he went seeking power in places where power should not be sought. He traveled into the deep forest, past where the wise people stopped, into the territory of things that existed before humans gave them names. And there he found something ancient, something that had once been worshipped but had been forgotten when people turned to newer gods. This entity, this forgotten spirit, offered the founder a bargain. It would grant his family protection, would ensure they survived when others perished, would give them just enough fortune to always be comfortable but never so much that they became targets. In exchange, the founder's family would serve as its anchor to the physical world, would keep it contained in a form where it could experience the world without being able to act freely in it. The mask was created as this container, carved by the best craftsman the founder could find, then filled with the spirit through a ritual that required blood sacrifice. The spirit agreed to this limitation because even limited existence was better than the complete oblivion of being forgotten, and it was patient, knowing that eventually, over generations, someone would break the rules, would release it, would give it freedom again. The founder agreed to these terms without fully understanding what he was accepting. The covenant was sealed with his blood and the blood of his firstborn son, binding his entire lineage to the agreement. And for 10 generations, the mask had been passed down, kept in its box, kept under control, with each generation told just enough of the truth to keep them obedient to the rules but not enough to understand the full horror of what they were maintaining. Until now. Until Chinedu's greed and Obiora's failure to protect the heirloom had broken the covenant and released the spirit partially from its prison. What happens now? Obiora asked, his voice hollow. The priest looked at him with something like pity. Now it begins to hunt, he said simply. It will start with the one who stole it, who broke faith first. Then it will move to the rest of the bloodline, consuming them one by one unless someone can restore the covenant, unless someone can convince it to return to the mask willingly. And there is only one way to do that. He paused, knowing his next words would devastate Obiora. Someone of the bloodline must offer themselves as a permanent vessel. Must agree to wear the mask forever, to become the container themselves, to sacrifice their own identity and existence to keep the spirit bound. That was the true inheritance your father was passing to you, not just the mask, but the potential responsibility of becoming its prison if things went wrong. Obiora felt his world collapse. His father had known. Had known the danger, had known the terrible possibility, and had still placed this burden on him. It felt like betrayal, like his entire life had been a lie leading to this moment. Why me? He asked, his voice breaking. Why not Chinedu? He is the eldest. Why not Ngozi? Why me? The priest shrugged. Perhaps your father thought you were strongest. Perhaps he thought you would make the right choice when the time came. Perhaps he was simply afraid and chose the son who would least question him. We cannot know. But I can tell you this, if someone does not offer themselves soon, the spirit will grow too strong to contain. It will consume your entire family, then begin spreading to others, feeding on greed and disappointment and betrayal wherever it finds them. It will become a plague on the living world. And that will be your family's legacy, not protection and survival, but destruction and horror. While Obiora was learning the terrible truth, Chinedu's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The hallucinations had become constant. He could no longer distinguish between what was real and what the masked spirit was showing him. His expensive apartment had become a nightmare realm where every surface reflected the carved face back at him, where shadows moved with purpose, where whispers filled every moment of silence. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped leaving his home. His business partners called, concerned about missed meetings and abandoned deals. His friends stopped by, worried about his suddenly erratic behavior. But Chinedu could only stare at them with haunted eyes and ask if they could see the faces, if they could hear the laughter, if they could feel the thing watching them from just beyond the edge of perception. On the 7th night after selling the mask, Chinedu finally broke completely. He called Mr. Hossan, the art dealer, begging to buy the mask back, offering double, triple, 10 times what he had been paid. But Hossan informed him coldly that the mask had already been sold, purchased by a wealthy American collector who had flown it out of the country that very afternoon, taken it to New York where it would be displayed in his private collection, admired by people who had no understanding of what they were looking at, no comprehension of the danger they were inviting into their lives. Chinedu hung up the phone and began to laugh, a sound that started normal but quickly spiraled into something broken and terrible, laughter that sounded like crying, that sounded like screaming, that sounded like sanity shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. That night, Chinedu put on his finest suit, styled his hair carefully, and walked out onto his balcony on the 14th floor of his building. Neighbors who saw him said he was talking to someone, gesturing animatedly, arguing with empty air. Then, still talking, still gesturing, he climbed onto the railing. Security footage would later show him standing there for several minutes, perfectly balanced, his lips moving constantly, his eyes fixed on something no camera could capture. Then he stepped off into nothing, and fell, and died instantly when he hit the pavement below. The official report called it suicide brought on by a psychotic break. But those who knew about the mask understood it was something far worse. It was consumption. The spirit had taken him completely, had fed on his guilt and fear and madness until there was nothing left of Chinedu but meat and bones, his soul consumed, his existence erased from everywhere but memory. Obiora learned of his brother's death through a phone call from the police, and he felt many things in that moment: grief, horror, guilt for not saving him, and underneath it all, a cold understanding that this was just the beginning. The spirit would not stop with Chinedu. It had tasted blood, had fed on fear, and now it was free in a way it had not been for generations. It would hunt down every member of the Okonkwo bloodline, would consume them all unless someone stopped it. But how do you stop something that exists in the spaces between reality and nightmare? How do you fight something that feeds on human weakness? Ngozi began experiencing her own visitations soon after. She would wake to find her children standing over her bed, but their faces were wrong, replaced by the mask's carved features, their eyes glowing with that same ivory light. Her husband, a good man who knew nothing of the family curse, began to pull away from her, saying she frightened him now, saying something about her had changed, something he could not name but instinctively feared. Ngozi's resentment about being excluded from the inheritance had created an opening, a crack in her spiritual armor, and the masked spirit was pushing through it, feeding on her disappointment, growing stronger with each moment of her bitterness. She called Obiora in desperation, and he told her everything the priest had revealed, told her about the founder's bargain and the covenant and the terrible choice that now faced their family. Someone must offer themselves, he said, his voice heavy with dread. Someone must wear the mask and become its prison, must sacrifice their own life to save the rest of the family. And I think it must be me. Papa chose me. Papa knew this might happen. He prepared me for this, though I did not understand until now. But Ngozi, hearing this, felt something shift inside her. All her life she had been told she was less important because she was female, had been excluded and diminished, and now her brother was saying he would be the hero, would be the one who saved everyone. The resentment that had been food for the masked spirit suddenly transformed into something else, something like determination, something like rage at a lifetime of being undervalued. "No," she said firmly. "Not you. Me. I will do it. I will wear the mask." Obiora protested, saying the priest had indicated it should be him, that Papa had chosen him for this. But Ngozi interrupted. "Papa chose wrong. Papa always chose wrong when it came to me. He could not see past my gender to my strength. He could not imagine that a woman could carry such a burden. But I am stronger than you, brother. Stronger than Chinedu was. I have borne 5 children. I have held my family together through poverty and sickness and disappointment. I have survived in ways neither of you had to. If someone must become the masked prison, it should be someone who knows what it means to contain multitudes while maintaining their own identity. It should be me." The argument between Ngozi and Obiora continued for days, each insisting they should be the one to make the sacrifice, each believing they were better suited, each, if we are honest, motivated not just by nobility but by the need to prove something, to justify their existence, to finally be seen as valuable by a family and a tradition that had so often made them feel inadequate. Meanwhile, the masked spirit continued to grow stronger. More family members began experiencing visitations. Obiora's daughters saw the mask's face in their dreams, calling to them, promising them things if they would just come to it, just wear it, just let it in. Ngozi's children began drawing pictures of the mask compulsively, filling page after page with its terrible features, unable to stop even when their hands cramped and bled from gripping pencils too tightly. The priest warned them that time was running out, that soon the spirit would be too strong to contain, that the window for restoration was closing rapidly. He performed protective rituals over the family, burning herbs and speaking old prayers, but these were temporary measures, bandages on a mortal wound. Only the sacrifice would end it, would bind the spirit back into containment, would save the family from complete destruction. But there was one more complication that no one had anticipated. The American collector who had purchased the mask was not keeping it in his collection. He had been frightened by dreams and visions almost immediately after the mask entered his home, had heard the whispers and seen the faces, and not being bound to it by blood or covenant, had been able to do what the Okonkos could not. He sold it again, passing the cursed object along like a disease vector spreading infection. And now no one knew where the mask was. It had entered the global art market, passed from dealer to collector to gallery, moving through New York to London to Paris, its location unknown, its path untraceable. This meant that whoever offered themselves as vessel would have to do so without the physical mask, would have to call the spirit to themselves through ritual and blood, would have to become the container without the wooden form to guide the process. The priest said it was possible but incredibly dangerous. The mask was a template, a structure for the spirit to inhabit. Without it, the person offering themselves will have to provide all the structure, will have to maintain their identity while sharing their body with an ancient force that wants to consume them. Many who attempted this in the old times were destroyed in the process, torn apart by the conflict between human will and spirit hunger. Are you both certain you are strong enough? Neither Ngozi nor Obiora answered immediately, both suddenly aware of what they were really volunteering for, not a clean martyrdom, not a noble death, but an eternal struggle, a lifetime of maintaining boundaries within their own mind, of being both themselves and something other, of never having peace, never having rest, never having escape. It was a horror beyond death, and yet it was necessary. Without it, the entire Okonkwo family would be consumed, and the spirit would continue spreading through the world, feeding on human weakness until it grew into something that threatened not just one family but humanity itself. Finally, after 3 days of prayer and preparation and facing their deepest fears, both Ngozi and Obiora presented themselves to the priest for the ritual. He looked at them both, these siblings who had spent so much of their lives in competition and disappointment and misunderstanding, now united in their willingness to sacrifice everything for family, and he made a decision that went against all.